My name is Kristopher Larson. I am the president and CEO of an organization called Downtown Grand Rapids Incorporated. Many of you have heard of that. Some of you have not. Just for sake of background, we took 3 different public organizations and we jammed them all together in this very peaceful merger to create Downtown Grand Rapids Incorporated. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about a different E associated with sustainability, particularly as it relates to the public sector and the ways that we have embraced almost a citizen-driven ecology, or a sustainability of that citizen-driven ecology. Uh-oh. Oh, that's not mine. Every direction moves it the same way. Nope, am I still going the wrong way here? That's this guy's again.
We can do.
So that was my presentation. Do you happen to have any questions? I'll tell you a little bit more background while we try to sort this up. We've taken organizations who have a traditional history of investing in economic sustainability in downtown and environmental sustainability, and we have created this one synthesized entity that's meant to really serve as the conduit or go-to for all things downtown. And in that space, we do everything from cleaning the streets to planting flowers, to investing in major real estate and planning initiatives. Hey, that's me. Yeah. Hey, thanks for that guy. Okay, so some examples of big projects we've been engaged in the past. Van Andel Arena is easily identified. Grand River Floodwalls and JW Marriott. Great examples of the bricks and mortar investments of the DDA of past. But what we do is embrace a very different paradigm associated with expectations of the community, particularly given the previous presenters' comments about the millennial generation. In particular, I'm going to talk a little bit about the changing expectations by citizens to be engaged in organizations like your own. And I'm going to reduce this right up front. Admittedly, this is an overgeneralization of the typographies that make up our downtowns. And given the grand history of revitalization of downtowns across the country, it didn't just happen in Grand Rapids, believe it or not. I am going to reduce this to the before revitalization as this wonderful moment in time where everything just kind of reversed its trend, and then after revitalization to talk about what's different now and why we have to change our game as it relates to engaging the community. Because before revitalization, there were basically 3 typographies of people that got to drive the direction of downtown: patriarchal property owners, trustworthy public officials, and cozy, biding their time bureaucrats, right? And in many cases, these were the individuals who were forced this idea of open meetings acts and sunshine laws, because this is a lot of the late 1970s and the changing expectations for transparency in government. Right? And so it wasn't necessarily something that we ushered in voluntarily. In many cases, it was forced upon government. It was forced upon those that ultimately used to benefit from a lot of the direct actions of government. And what's different now in our downtowns is we've got these incredible changing demographies. Free at last, right? The empty nesters that are retiring into our downtowns. The hip, right? So these are the taste makers that are helping to tell us what's cool. And the most important is the converted. And this is one that I often sit back and think about how far our communities have come. When I got started in this business 15 years ago, very few people were pro-urban. It was very unpopular to be interested in your downtown. And now downtowns across the country are a place that everybody can find some common area of interest, whether it's recreational or civic or religious. Downtowns have reversed their course. And so it's not just a community that is governed by those who get to say yes and no. It's governed by those who we give the opportunity to say yes and no. And so as we think about the changing expectations for engagement and what that means from the ecology of our citizens, what I would argue, and this is as a city planner, is that for too long, we have reduced the need for public engagement to very specific purposes associated with government. That's associated with planning and public policy. So whenever we wanted to make some big decision about the way we govern ourselves, or when we wanted to set the course for our future, we built these big, large public planning processes around it. And those were the opportunities where we forced ourselves to talk to the community. But in many cases, the mechanisms by which we implement these good intentions were crafted before revitalization passed, right? And so we're often stuck in this cycle of using the same mechanisms over and over again, right? And expecting different results from it. So we've got kind of the public meeting, you know, this is like 7 o'clock on a Thursday night in some church basement because you've got nothing better to do that night that you want to spend your time there. This is one of my favorites. This is the design charrette. This is where we empower architects to bring together laypersons from the community, and we put very intimidating documents and markers in front of them, and we ask them to start identifying the areas where transitional density should occur. Right, and then somehow we're getting good insight from this that we as professionals can use. The standing committee, and then public comment. And public comment is one of my favorite because people are still under the illusion that public comment is this great shaper of opinion and decision making. And unfortunately, we've got to reframe this because it's not the series of boxes that we check and we said we did these things. We engage the community by doing these. The expectation is very different, particularly for millennials who do not want to come to your public meeting, unless it's a skateboarding ordinance, Mr. Mayor, right? They don't want to engage in the ways that we have crafted these expectations for engagement. And so we have to think about communicating differently and creating a series of opportunities that, quite frankly, look more like these things. Right, and anybody, what does that sound like? Who said that? Relationship? Exactly right. We choose what kind of relationship we want to have with our communities, right? And it is the way that organizations and individuals like myself who are entrusted with public funds, who operate in the public eye. Basically, everything I say in a meeting gets put in the paper. Right? It is our commitment to these values that drives the relationship with the community. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we help to accomplish that, to give you some takeaways for you guys to leave with today. And so the first is our alliances. And so we have taken, believe it or not, when I was hired, I had 9 board members, 9 bosses. We have since adapted our organizational structure through the merger. I now have 48 bosses. And we voluntarily have created our 3 alliances, our citizen-led alliances. And these are not individuals who are appointed by our city commission, but who are practitioners and volunteers who want to be a part of downtown's future. And we give them a space to participate at a very high level, everything from budgeting to project level implementation. We just passed a budget last week where our citizen-led alliances participated and ultimately approved 94% of our discretionary expenditures that we're going to make in the coming year. That's $5 million that we're entrusting for these citizens who are demonstrated a real sincerity to participating in our organization. And by being very intentional and reaching into the neighborhoods and reaching out to organizations and other types of networks of individuals who have ultimately lost a voice in the existing system, we're creating a much larger body of thought. Because ultimately this is all of our downtown and their downtown. And we're reframing that understanding of what it means to participate in our organization. Compelling a conversation. This was a tactic that I used when I first moved here. My first project that I was given was the Blue Bridge. And I was in my first meeting with the city engineer, and they showed me a line item budget for $800,000. And I said, well, what is this amount here for? He said, well, that's for paint. So that's a lot of money for paint. At least tell me what kind of color paint we're going to buy. And he said, well, we're going to buy blue paint. I said, well, that seems like we're just jumping the gun on this one. Why would we buy blue paint? Because it's the Blue Bridge. Okay, maybe, right? We went out and asked the community, and what did they tell me? 68% said that they wanted blue, right? But this was very important because we began having a different conversation, particularly empowered through an understanding of what the bridge was, because it's not always been the Blue Bridge. Historically, it's the Grand Rapids, Indiana Railroad Bridge. Historically, it was black. It was only blue because we stopped painting it after a primer coat was put on in 1978. We basically lived with a primer coat that began to fade and fade and fade and fade and fade, right? And all those individuals with the before revitalization passed, they really didn't care that much. right? Because this wasn't their downtown. They weren't vested here. We hadn't built our downtown residential base. We're changed as a community. We can imagine things that are different, right? And through this input, we began to explore new ideas. We talked to over 3,000 citizens who began to explore new ideas, new treatments, and we introduced this idea of color changing lights that enable us to make the blue bridge, which was only blue 12 hours a day, we now make it blue 24 hours a day. And we can make it any color according to special conferences and other events that are in town. And so it really evokes the next chapter for this important part of public infrastructure. And none of these conversations happen if we don't just second guess ourselves and say, but wait a minute, maybe the community does have a preference. You know what? We all have a favorite color. Our conversations need not only be about concepts like transitional density, they can be about simple things, about what color we're going to paint a bridge. Rewarding participation. We use our social media outlets oftentimes to test new ideas. So it becomes kind of a training ground for things that we're working on. We had an ambition in 2012 to make a very large urban recreation investment. And what rose to the top of the list was this idea of a big movie screen. Right, so we as an organization decided we're going to create this event. We now call it Movies in the Park. And strange things happen at Movies in the Park, including a DeLorean that just shows up when we showed Back to the Future. And quite frankly, we get 4,000 to 5,000 people out to every one of these events. We spend $0 marketing it because I've crowdsourced the entire genesis of the program and to the film selection. So it's now a community-owned event. We don't have to promote it. The community already owns it. I don't have to force people there. That's a big part of changing the way that we're doing business. Going to them. A simple way of changing your expectations for how you talk to people. Right? Instead of asking people to come to your meeting, go to theirs. Go to places where people already are. Put your planning stuff in a box. Go find an interesting table at a coffee shop or bar and sit down and enter into a conversation. And we use this technique in particular with a large project we did called Arena South Visioning, where we enabled citizens to basically have an opportunity to participate in this level of planning. And we won an award from the American Planning Association for basically, I think it's called Excellence in Public Outreach. But we did this by being true to who we are, right? At the time, Grand Rapids had taken all this fanfare for becoming Beer City, and we really wanted to embrace what that meant for us. And so we wanted to combine this opportunity for input with something that people are already proud about with themselves, proud about with their community, and ultimately looking to get to be honest with ourselves and to be able to provide that opportunity in a different way. A couple more of these and then I'm done. Engaging constantly, and this is the ongoing commitment to continual engagement. That's what's ultimately different about what we're doing, is we're not having episodic conversations with the general public about something that is big and wide-reaching and policy level on a macro basis. We're having very specific opportunities to be able to derive people and their interest level to something specific that we're doing. And we're continually being able to grow them into our ladder of participation, things like Window Wonderland, where we don't just contract for services. We work in relationships with Kendall College of Art and Design, and we identify 100 students each wintertime to be able to dress up the storefronts of businesses in downtown. And because we've done this now for 3 years, we basically have a rolling program where students now compete for the opportunity to participate in this. And because it's a contest where we basically provide an award for the student that wins, as well as an advertising stipend for the business that wins. So there's something vested as an interest for the business and the students to compete in that space where citizens then vote on which interactions they like the best. Two more, then I'm done. Technology, it is your friend. We are finding new ways every day to build new applications where we can test basically people's preferences. I like to tell people that within 6 months, we're going to have an opportunity that when you walk by a planter box, you're going to get a push notification from me that asks you if you want purple or pink flowers, right? Because it doesn't matter to me what color we're choosing flowers. What matters is that you have an opportunity to participate. And for me, it's my job to take your investment. Your investment is the time that you give me. It could be responding to a simple text notification, or it could be participating at one of our citizen-led efforts. My job is to return more value to you in exchange for your time so that you're getting a higher ROI. That's how I build the sustainability of that ecological base. Deferring authority, you've probably heard this time and time again. It's all about transitioning to governing bodies that look more like the real world and being very intentional about that. And so we're actually using our alliances for that purpose. Basically, it's a leadership breeding ground to grow future service, either into our fiduciary bodies or in city commission appointed boards. So my approach summary, and then I'm all done. It's all about accommodating people where they are. You've got to build different levels of engagement according to different preferences. Some people have 5 seconds. Some people have 5 years to give you, right? And we have to choose how to get them in the door. You can't ask everybody for 5 years. You got to sometimes start smaller. Productive input follows empowerment and education. If you give them the tools to give you good input, you are empowering them to have ownership stake in their neighborhood and community's future. Being very intentional about reaching out into underhood populations, being true to who you are, rushing to where people are, right? At DGRI, we always have a roadshow and we'll travel. And we do 5 or 10 of these things a week because ultimately we want to be the people that say yes. We want to be the people that are reaching out further and talking to the community about things like creative, progressive avenues for involvement, enabling people to move up that ladder for progressive engagement with your organizations. And then lastly is rewarding good behavior. Now this is absolutely critical to all of this. They've got to get that ROI on the time that they invest in you. Their thoughts, their passions, their expertise, sometimes their fears. You've got to empower them and give them that ROI so that they can see how their input helped to shape whatever it is that you're working on. So thank you all very much. I apologize for the goofy start.